If you're my friends, you'll probably know that I'm an airplane geek, and you'll probably think that I only like this film because it featured airplanes. Well, I'm afraid it's a little bit more than that, and I'm gonna talk about that in this video. Now let's explore the concept. It's kind of a guy. He was turned from a man to a pig. He flies an airplane along the Adriatic coast, and he is in post-World War I Italy. Now I'm going to give a spoiler warning here. I highly recommend you watching the movie first before watching this video, and I'm going to tell you most plot points, so tune out if you didn't watch it yet. I warned you. Okay, so Porco's plane was shot down and damaged by another guy named Curtis. Now, funnily enough, Curtis is an aircraft manufacturer, and Curtis is jealous of Porco because Porco has won the affections of Gina, which is a really beautiful woman. So he gets his remains of his plane shipped to Milan, where an engineer named Piccolo fixes the airplane with his team of female mechanics. Now please don't assume I'm sexist, because this point will be very important later. There he meets the designer of his new plane, Theo, who is female too. And when the plane is complete, Porco and Theo took the plane out for a spin and flew it back to the Adriatic. When they arrived at Porco's secret beach cove, they were both ambushed by pirates, led by Curtis, who is the guy who shot down the plane. Now Curtis and the pirates threatened to kill Theo and Porco and destroy the airplane. However, Theo's ingenuity came in and saved the day, and she talked the pirates out of killing them. However, as a prize, Curtis and Porco will participate in a seaplane dogfight duel. That night, Porco recounts of how he was turned into a pig. Juicy backstories, yay! Back in the Great War, which is World War I, Porco was a fighter pilot. His entire squadron of aircraft was shot down by Austro-Hungarian planes. He blacked out in the middle, and found himself and the plane floating above an ocean of clouds. Around him he sees his fellow squadron with their airplanes floating up to a white band of the sky. There he finds out that the white band is a river of fighter planes, all of which are shot down during the war. He then sinks down through the clouds and discovers he's been turned into a pig. He personally believes that it's divine punishment from the gods for being the sole survivor of a battle. The next day, Porco and Curtis have a dogfight, and Porco won narrowly. As the spectators leave, Porco and Curtis make peace, and the scene ends with Curtis being surprised about something when he looked at Porco's face. Presumably, Porco may have been turned back into a human. Now that's a great story. Now can we derive some meaning out of this? Alright, so first of all, we look at Porco. Despite being an ace pilot and a wooer for the chicks, we have to see what lies beneath him. Let's go back to that flashback scene with all the fighter jets and the clouds and stuff. And one member of the squadron is Porco's friend, Bellini. Before the fateful flight, Porco recalls attending Bellini's rushed wedding, where Bellini has to leave immediately to return to his flying duties. Unfortunately, that's probably the last time his wife is gonna see him. Porco, who wasn't married at that time, was angry at himself for not helping Bellini during the air battle, and perhaps see himself as a fool who didn't sacrifice himself to save Bellini. After all, Bellini is married, and Porco is not. Now after the incident and his hallucination of Bellini's plane rising up to the heavens, he simply could not forgive himself, and therefore he casted a spell and turned himself into a pig. In the dialogue between him and Theo, Porco mentioned that it is a divine power that turned him from a man to pig. However, I digress, and I personally think that he told Theo that it was a god who did it because Porco wants to make it seem that he deserved it, suggesting that the guilt is strong during the timeline of the story. So basically, it is actually him who cursed himself to become a pig. If we look throughout the events of the story, we can see the events' effects on Porco. On a conversation about the rising fascism in Italy, Porco was quick to condemn them, showing his anti-war nature. He's all anti-war and stuff because, of course, a war killed his friend, who just got married, and you can imagine how traumatizing it is for him. Porco sees what humanity is capable of doing, the death, the pain, the destruction. In fact, he condemned himself to a pig because he probably think that humans are lower than pigs, which are animals that we all know. They roll in mud, they're disgusting, stuff like that. Now, We can see that anger stemming from anger and guilt and all that, stemming from the squadron incident. Porco just witnessed Bellini's marriage, seeing something as happy and beautiful like marriage being crushed and destroyed when Bellini's plane was shot down after a short while later, probably made him lose faith in humanity. Now, Porco sees the world and humanity in a very negative light and has little faith in the morality of human beings because of that incident. Now, all he believes humans do is kill, 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 like a bunch of savages. Yes, despite him seeing people this way, he treats people humanely and peacefully. On the first dogfight with Curtis where he got shot down, Porco refused to open fire, only allowing Curtis to fly around and waste his bullets. He hated how humans behave like savages, but he refused to be a savage himself. Now let's look at how the events of the story changed him. When he brought his plane back to Milan to be fixed, he finds out that all the workers in the workshop are women. Now if we look at this contextually, the reason why the entire workforce is female can be attributed to the World War I, which has happened earlier in the timeline. Now a lot of the men are killed at war, and a lot of them are probably still serving in the military, so therefore women have to take over the predominantly male aircraft building industry. If we look back at Porco's negativity towards what humans could do, we can think about how a lot of the dreadful destruction and war that's created are actually fought by men and led by men, or even created by men. Now I'm not going to be a gender studies professor and go, fuck the patriarchy, but all the soldiers fighting World War I are men, and the leaders behind them are men too. Now look at Churchill, Stalin, Mussolini, Roosevelt, but well, they're World War II, but you get the idea. Yeah, well, most of the leaders are male, but okay. Since Porco's apathy stems from war, he might as well be reminded in the female-dominant workshop that there's another 50% of humanity, cough cough, the females, that aren't the warmongering savages that he imagined. Now this goes contrary to what he believed humanity to be, which is like everyone is bad, everyone likes to kill. Now that's a little bit of a revelation. Now this journey of revelation continues. When he arrived back at the cove with Theo, he was ambushed by pirates, like I said earlier. Now at first they were both going to be killed, but Theo stepped in and peacefully resolved this conflict. Now the only resolution to conflict Porco saw and remembered up to that moment is war. The entire World War I. The war that resulted in the death of his friend Bellini, millions of deaths, the falling of nations, led to the pain and suffering of many, and later in history caused a Great Depression and indirectly starting World War II. But right at this cove, Theo resolved this conflict with her charm and ingenuity. No one was killed, no plane was destroyed, everyone was happy. What Porco saw is what humanity is also capable of, making peace. The only compromise is a seaplane duel of the next day, but at least it's better than blood and bullets. Now let's move on to the ending. Curtis and Porco fought gracefully above the skies. Being a pacifist, Porco does not fire any bullets at all. But what started off as Porco being peaceful ended up in a foolish brawl, where even Porco threw kicks and punches despite his apathy towards war and violence. Now the conflict wins in the favor of Porco narrowly. That's kind of a bit of a narrative, well, whatever. But with Gina flying in to warn everyone about the approaching Italian navy, the pirates and the Theo and the spectators leave, leaving Curtis and Porco alone. That was when Curtis points out something peculiar about Porco's face, and the scene ends and the epilogue begins. Now, although there are many interpretations of whether Porco turned back into a human at that point, but I'm gonna assume he did, for the sake of this video. So why did he turn back into human? If we look at a battle we just had, we could see Porco's pacifism and no shooting policy up in the skies, but we also see him fighting like a fool on the ground. Perhaps Porco has came to a realization that this is how humanity is. It isn't the negative perception that he believed after Bellini's plane was shot down, where humans are mongering beasts, but it isn't a polar opposite either. It's not like a pretty Disney sort of magical world that it portrays. Now, maybe, just maybe, it's somewhere along the middle. Porco cursed himself into being a pig because he thinks that the savagery of humanity makes humans lower than pigs, but then he realized even he, as a pig, was caught up in the heat of a moment and fought with Curtis, just like how the Serbian nationalists shot the Austro-Hungarian prince that started World War I, or how the Austrian pilot shot down Bellini's plane. Sorry, Austrians. The realization that humanity isn't perfect lifted his curse, and he realized that he was human too, like the rest of the world. In the epilogue, even Theo acknowledges that fact. Quote, "There have been many wars and rebellions since then, but our friendship has been lasting." Her speech points out that the good in humanity, i.e. friendship, is still within this world despite those wars. So what can we learn from this movie? On the internet, I see a lot of people saying that they lost their faith in humanity. Sometimes, after some sort of atrocity, I think the same way as well. In fact, this movie is released in 1995, which is the height of the Yugoslav wars. The Russian-backed Serbians are at war with neighboring Croatia, Albania, and Bosnia. It was a bloody conflict with thousands of deaths due to ethnic cleansing, showing the worst of humanity. Cough cough, World War I. But are we going to be the cynical Porco who believes that all of humanity is bad because of that single conflict? Or are we going to be the Porco at the end of the movie? We could scowl and frown upon those who act immorally and inhumanely, but sometimes we look back at ourselves and see that we aren't that far away from them, just like how Porco condemned war and violence, then proceeded to fistfight with Curtis. We could sometimes see that we're a minority of activists, who despise humanity because of the way they treat certain groups of people, animals, or entities. But those few people then send death threats and harass those who disagree with them. Humanity could be bad, really bad. But we have to remember that there's always a good side, and despite us making silly mistakes and decisions, we should try to stay on that good side. In the epilogue, Theo narrates about how life went on after the events of the story. This shows that life moves on, regardless of whether humanity is good or bad, and life will not wait for those who bury their heads in the negative side.